South American Indian culture starts with Corral, which is about 120 kilometers north of Lima in the Supe River Valley. This is where the Indians first started building large stone structures, and they started that in 2600 BC. It has all of the basic formula that you'll find all the way through the Mayan and Aztec cultures, with amphitheaters, large courtyards, and pyramids. The interesting thing about 2600 BC, of course, is that that's approximately the same time that the Egyptians were building the Great Pyramid. So there's not a great deal of difference in terms of time between the progress in South America with the Indians and with the European and Middle Eastern cultures. To get to the Maya, we really have to jump ahead about 4,000 years. Now, this is going to be a certain amount of boring history, but please stick with me. At around 1200 AD, Manco Capac, the first Inca, came up from the Lake Titicaca area and settled in Cuzco. And Cuzco was the home of the Inca and the center of their power. They were just another mountain tribe up until about 1430. Now in 1430, what happens is one of their neighbors start pressing them, and their neighbors are doing so well against the Inca that the Inca king and the crown prince basically quit the field and are ready to retreat from Cuzco. However, one of the younger brothers was named Pachacuti, and Pachacuti takes command of the tribe of the Incas, and he defeats his enemies, and he starts a campaign putting together a huge empire. In fact, Pachacuti is in many ways very much like Napoleon. Virtually everything that the Inca were said to have done, and done well, Pachacuti was said to have started. Well, Pachacuti now is followed then by a series of fairly good Inca kings. And now these kings extended the empire, and they extended the empire right up until the time that the Spanish arrived. When the Spanish arrived, Atahualpa was the Inca. Now, the Inca Empire at that time, by some measures, was the largest empire in the world. If it had started in New York City, for example, it would have stretched all the way down to Panama, because it was from Ecuador, almost Colombia really, all the way down to Santiago, Chile, and included even parts of Argentina. Now, Atahualpa's father had been Inca, and he had the army in the north conquering Ecuador, and he was centered up in Quitos, and he had married a local Quitos princess, and that was Atahualpa's mother. He also had another son, Huascar, down in Cusco. And the old man was fond of Atahualpa and wanted Atahualpa to succeed him in some way, although Huascar was probably the more legitimate heir to the throne. So his father decided to split the empire, the north going to Atahualpa at the old man's death, and the south going to Huascar at Cusco. When the old man died, probably of smallpox, civil war broke out between the two sons. But Atahualpa had the advantage because he had the battle-tested veteran Inca army under his control. You know the rest of the story. Atahualpa visits Pizarro, who has only about 200 Spaniards under his control. Pizarro seizes Atahualpa and demands gold, and the Inca king delivers one room full of gold and two of silver. Atahualpa delivers the gold, and in so doing, the Spanish send some envoys to Cusco to supervise the collection of the gold there, and the envoys returned from Cuzco. This is a modern map of Cusco, but the old city of Cusco is the area outlined in the blue ink. You'll notice that it forms the shape of a cougar, and that's no accident. The city of Cusco is built on Inca foundations, and you can see that in many of the old streets, especially in the center of town. This particular one is just off the main plaza. What has happened, of course, is that after the Spanish took control of Cusco, they leveled basically all of the Inca palaces and temples, and they converted them to either the uses for the Catholic Church or for the Spanish administration or for housing for nobles. This is the Plaza de Armas, the major town square in Cusco, and in Inca times this square was actually twice the size that it is now. The churches that you see were originally Inca palaces, and incidentally there's a little demonstration going on there in the background. You see those people in white? That's some kind of little political demonstration. Something else that you'll notice here is that many of the buildings surrounding the square have arched porticos of one kind or another, and they have balconies. And you can see those balconies and porticos in the 16th and 17th century woodcuts of Cusco, so those are quite original. Well, back to Atahualpa. When he was a captive of the Spanish and he delivered the gold, he expected Pizarro, of course, would let him go, but Pizarro did not. The next thing that Atahualpa does is kind of interesting. He sends messages to his generals in Cusco to kill his brother Huáscar, who is now his captive, and that's done. Shortly thereafter, the Spanish asked whether or not Atahualpa would become a Christian. Atahualpa was shown a Bible and told that it was the Word of God, and so he picked up the Bible and he put it to his ear. But when he heard nothing, he threw it on the ground. That was an action that was not well calculated to improve his relationship with the Spanish, unfortunately. Atahualpa was told that he was going to be killed, and they asked him whether he would prefer to be burned as a heathen or strangled to death as a Christian. Now, this is an important decision for Atahualpa because the Inca did believe that the body had to be maintained intact in order to get the full benefit out of your afterlife, much like the Egyptians. The result of that is that he decided that he would become a Christian so that he could be strangled to death and his body be preserved. Incidentally, something that I've noticed about both Cusco and Lima, for that matter, is that both of them are very lively places 24 hours a day. There always seems to be something going on. Commerce is going on, frequently there's music, parties, and you would imagine that this was driven almost entirely by tourists, but it's my impression that that's simply not true. Of course, tourists do provide a large amount of backbone to the economy, especially in Cusco. But the local people seem to be every bit as interested in partying all night as the tourists are. But in Cusco, of course, tourists are the major source of revenue.
Welcome to Cusco. Would you like to buy CD?
Welcome to Cusco. You like Cusco?
Welcome to Cusco. Welcome to Peru. I am Marlene. I sell the dolls and puppets. All is my work. Bye.
This is a model of the Coricancha, the temple to the sun that the Incas had before the Spanish came in and changed the architecture. The major source, or a major source at least, of the gold that Atahualpa gave to Pizarro almost certainly came from this temple. This temple is said to have been absolutely covered with plate gold. And the envoys that Pizarro sent to Cusco reported that this place was just loaded with gold. This is the actual stonework that remains of the Coricancha. In Incan society, gold was not used in commerce. It was used solely for religious purposes, and gold was supposed to be the metal of the sun. The moon, on the other hand, was represented by silver. Incidentally, silver and gold traditionally in the old world had the same value up until this period. There was so much silver found in the Americas that it permanently changed the balance of the price between gold and silver. It is said that this temple was covered by 700 solid gold plates, each one weighing about 5 pounds. And as you can see, the stonework here is absolutely superb. The stones fit as closely together as any that were created anywhere, I believe, in the world, probably. The fountain that is in the middle of the courtyard is the original Inca fountain, and it was said to have had 55 kilos, that's well over 100 pounds, of gold on it. On the opposite side of the courtyard is the temple to the moon, and we would assume that it was probably plated in solid silver. If you take a close look at the wall, you can see some small holes in these stones, and they may have had pegs in them. Those pegs may have allowed the solid silver to be mounted on the wall. I didn't see any on the Sun Temple for mounting gold, however. One of the things that's on the temple, though, is you can see little holes that have been filled with wood, and my guess is that the wood that's up there is the original roofing material. In addition to the solid gold and silver plates, there would have been a large number of precious metal objects. One of them would have been the solar disk, which has been depicted here in a park in Cusco, but the original solar disk probably did look something like this. Meanwhile, back at the Coricancha, there are Inca reenactors. The old man that you're about to see who's playing the priest is actually a teacher, and the girls are playing the parts of the Virgins of the Sun. The language you just heard was Quechua, which is the language of the Inca, and it's the language spoken by a fairly large number of the rural people. Spanish is, of course, spoken in the major metropolitan areas and in Cusco. But we happen to be now at Sacsayhuaman. Now, there's always been a dispute as to just exactly what this was. But as you can see, it was a very large stone structure. And if you remember that map that I showed you of Cusco, this is the head of the cougar, the head of the puma. And some people say that this was a temple, but the Spanish referred to it as a fortress. And with stones like this, in 3 jagged rows, My gosh, it must have functioned very much like a fortress. In addition, Sacsayhuaman had at least 3 large towers, stone towers, on the top of it. Now, those towers now are completely gone, but when the Spanish were here, this must have been a really big complex. It's said to have been built by Pachacuti. He started in about 1430, and it was said to have been finished around 1508. The Spanish arrived in the 1530s, so this was a new building when the Spanish arrived.
Well, we're at Sacsayhuaman now. The guides, when they talk about this place, will always tell you that it's a sexy woman. They tell you that so that you can remember the name. Now, the Spanish, they thought that this location was a fortress, and indeed it's built very much like a fortress. But Garcilio de la Vega, el Inca, said it was really just a temple, but it has a lot of massive stonework in it. Now, Garcia Lasco was a very interesting person all by himself. He was the son of a conquistador captain and also of an Inca princess. And the result is that he probably had access to about as much information about the conquest and the Incas as anybody did. So his opinions are probably pretty good. Shortly after the Spanish killed the Inca Atahualpa, they occupied Cuzco and they made it their capital. Cuzco had, of course, been the capital of the Incas. But it wasn't long after that they had installed a puppet Inca by the name of Manco. And Manco got tired of being a puppet. And so eventually what happens is that there's an Inca revolt. Actually, there are several Inca revolts, but this is probably the most important one, certainly the first one. The Spanish numbered only about 200. They were bottled up in the city of Cuzco. The Inca, it's difficult to say how many there were. At their height, the Inca Empire could muster maybe 200,000 warriors, but after all the European diseases had run through the country and they had already been defeated once, and there had been a civil war, it's difficult to say how many warriors there were, but there must have been a very large number of them. Certainly there were thousands of them up here at Sacsayhuaman. Now the Spanish decided that the only way that they could break the siege was to take this citadel-like location. They had about 70 or 80 horses with them, and the Inca were terrified of horses. And so they mounted everybody that they possibly could on a horse, and they sent their cavalry force charging up here to Sacsayhuaman. It must have been a tremendous battle, because we know that something like 1,500 Inca warriors were killed here by the Spanish. At one of the towers, there was an Inca noble who was fighting using a Spanish sword and Spanish shield, and he was fairly successful in fending off the Spanish until he was overwhelmed. But eventually, the Spanish did take this location, although at some cost. For example, Juan Pizarro was killed in the attack.
The symbol of the city of Cusco is the condor, which devoured the dead Inca warriors. I found these 2 condors just outside the Department of Justice. I'm sure there must be some relationship. These rocks are absolutely huge. The one that you're about ready to see here in a minute is said to weigh 125 tons. The Spanish had the Inca cart away as many of these stones as they could into Cuzco. But Garcia Lasco de la Vega, El Inca, says that the Inca did not know how to move the largest stones. If the construction was started only a century before the Spanish arrived, how could the Inca have forgotten how to move those giant stones? And I think that the answer is very interesting. The answer is almost certainly that Garcia Lasco de la Vega was correct. The Inca didn't move those stones. In fact, the Inca were not the first people at this particular site. In Cuzco, you can see some evidence of pre-Inca foundation stones. Here is the back of the Coricancha. This is where the solar observatory is. If you look just below that, down into the courtyard, you will see eventually a wall, and that wall is pre-Inca. It's the light green stones that you're going to be seeing in just a few seconds. It's those pre-Inca builders who may have had the knowledge and the ability to move those large stones, and perhaps the Inca settled in Cuzco not so much because the soil was good, but because there had been occupation there already, and that there were already large stone buildings in the area.